Greetings, Pete Mesling here. I'd like to read a chapter to you from my new novel, The Portable Nine. It's a global thriller, and it involves, among other things, the bringing together of a group of mercenaries, the Portable Nine, after a fairly long period of relative inactivity. And that's really about the only setup I think you need to get the gist of the chapter I'm going to read here. So let's just jump right in. It's a chapter in which you're introduced to one of the Portable Nine, known as Abel Hazard. Sand raked the visor of his helmet as he rode his Kawasaki through the outback. The horizon before him was an expansive show of beautiful colors, but it meant that darkness was close at hand. That was fine. He belonged in the dark, but the wind was a pain in the ass. At least road trains, the massive semi-trucks and wildlife killers that crisscrossed the bush, were rare on this particular road. He was several tributaries removed from the great central road. There the combination of high winds and cargo transport had probably scared all other drivers into their burrows hours ago, or slowed them down to the point of retreat. Still, the truth was that Abel Hazard was going way too fast, pushing 140 kilometers an hour, wanting to put distance between himself and the mess he'd left behind in a homegrown watering hole a stone's toss from Kelgurly Boulder. Roy's Liquor Lodge was the name of the place, nothing like truth in advertising. The name didn't lead you to expect much, and that's just what you got. There was a filling station on one side of the road and Roy's establishment on the other. Abel had made use of both tonight. At the one, he'd topped off the tank of his bike. At the other, he'd settled a score with the Waverly brothers, who couldn't be relied on for much, but by God, they were at Roy's every Saturday night like the clockwork drunks they were. He suspected they wouldn't be sneaking onto his property any time soon to steal auto parts, but if they did, he knew where to find them. In well under an hour it was dark, though a cloudless sky provided a staggering view of the firmament. The motorcycle's headlamp didn't so much pierce the darkness as underscore the fact that it lay everywhere, like an inscrutable veil all around him. Even the drama relayed by the twinkling of the stars seemed to confirm that he was alone in the universe. No other traveler's experiences, no philosopher's conclusions, no scientist's theories left any trace that mattered to him now. He was a product of his own will. Even the two-wheeled machine he drove across the loose Australian clay might never have been built, if not in order to provide him with a means of transportation on this fateful night. He was the reason the kangaroos and wild boars had so far kept away from the road, and if one wandered into his path after all, he would be the cause of that as well. But nothing rushed into his path, panicked from a roadside feeding. He didn't even encounter a disorienting blast of bull dust, which might have formed easily enough in one of the dips of the roads he'd been traversing all afternoon, especially considering how far below normal rainfall levels the area was. There was a lot of loose dirt out there, and it didn't need the help of any road trains to make hell out of an otherwise simple ride. His strong belief in the power of his will wasn't without justification. When he was living in Germany, he'd decided to undergo an unusual surgical procedure. The rumor was that the science of it dated back to the concentration camps of World War II. He had never bothered to verify the claim. In fact, he didn't want to know. At the time, he'd been afraid to know. Now it just seemed right to remain in the dark, though William Faulkner's assertion that the past wasn't dead, it wasn't even past, did occur to him from time to time, and he wondered. But he never let the wonder unravel very much. The surgeon had been a long-faced Austrian by the name of Dr. Schweck. He'd assured Abel that he could remove his amygdala, the part of the brain that controls the fear response. Abel had heard of people losing their amygdala to disease, and along with them the ability to know fear, but the idea that his might actually be removed through surgery had lit a fire within him, and started him on a journey that took many, many months and many thousands of dollars to realize. Realize it he did. He was 7 years amygdala-free and free of the constraints of fear. If only he could have known this level of power and freedom during his last assignment with the Portable Nine. Well, things would have been very different. Clayton Barrymore might have been denied his day of victory for pulling the wool over the eyes of the Nine, for one thing. It all came down to trust. Abel had been afraid to distrust the very man who had hired them. He would never fear such a thing again, or such a man. He followed a sloping curve deeper into the desert landscape, and then there were lights. Vehicle lights. Encounters weren't rare on these back roads at night, or they were rare, rather, but not unheard of. Loners dotted the bush country as if exiled from every civilized part of the island nation. Still, Abel took note of the yellow jeep as it passed, as well as the emaciated youth who sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead into the vast black night. What was a young pup like that doing out beyond the black stump, all by himself, without a prayer of getting anywhere meaningful before daybreak? The lad needed a prayer as badly as anyone Abel had ever come across, and as he had the thought, he passed a rusted-out pickup truck buried nose first in a ditch on his right, a common enough sight in the outback. He figured the owners of such vehicles often looked a hell of a lot like Mr. Yellow Jeep. "Best of luck, mate," he said out loud, and followed it up with a dry laugh. Home was a ramshackle dwelling with a sizable outbuilding situated across a cluttered yard from the front door. Even by daylight, it looked a bit like a serial killer's haven, but what more could a man ask for when he didn't particularly want to be bothered? He parked his motorcycle next to the porch steps and removed his helmet. That's when he noticed the tracks. Jeep tracks, at a guess. "The son of a bitching snake," he muttered, no stranger to voicing his thoughts out in the great expanse. Tucking his helmet under one arm, he fished his house keys out of the pocket of his riding pants and climbed the wooden porch steps. What the hell did he want with me? And that led to the question, left unspoken, of whether the agitated young man would be paying Abel another visit. If so, when? It was a purely practical question, of course. No amygdala, no fear. But goddamn if there wasn't a funny kind of feeling in the pit of his guts. Maybe it wasn't fear, but something was doing its best to heighten his awareness. He pulled the screen door open and something fell to the porch. Well, what in the hell do we have here? He bent down to pick up what had fallen. Sure did come a good distance past nowhere just to deliver a note. Once inside, he dropped his keys and helmet on an unfinished end table. Switching on the light, he peeled open the envelope and removed the note. He smiled so hard it almost hurt. The mad marksman of Malta was back in play. Well, son of a bitch, that was fine news. Seattle, huh? Why the hell not? He'd never been there, but he figured if he didn't care for the city or its people, he could always stare at Mount Rainier in his spare time. Besides, he only expected to be there long enough for a briefing of some sort. He knew how Davenport operated, efficiently and with great cunning. He wondered how many of the others had already been contacted. Surely Davenport was in need of the 9 in their full glory, if he was in need of one. They were a difficult batch of humanity to manage, but if you needed to clear some brush, so to speak, you couldn't hope for a better team of misfits. The question of whether or not Mr. Yellow Jeep would be returning was also answered. He would not. The errand had not been a labor of love on his part. Davenport would have made the job inevitable but not delightful. If the kid had any sense, he'd leave Western Australia before the end of the month and let it become a memory he'd only half believe to be real in 5 years' time. Yes, sir, he'd give Mr. Faulkner's old saw a run for its money if he knew it was good for him. At some point between crossing the yard and unlocking the corrugated metal door to his oversized garage, he detected the singular insect whisper of a turboprop engine in the distant skies. It wasn't an uncommon means of getting in and out of some of the more cut-off mining communities in the region, but, considering the timing, he had to wonder if he of the yellow Jeep had found himself a way out of Dodge even sooner than Abel would have given him credit for. He smiled faintly as he slipped into the storage shed and pulled the thin chain of an overhead fluorescent. And there was Green Betty, the military green tank of a truck that would haul him to Perth. It wasn't a long vehicle, but climbing in and out took a little effort because of its height. The deeply treaded tires were about the same distance apart whether you measured left to right or front to back. An angled grill helped with potholes, especially if they were hiding under a lake of bull dust, and everything he could possibly need to keep himself alive was tied to the shortened flatbed. Despite its boxiness, the outfit carried a hell of a lot of cargo. What he didn't want exposed to the elements, he bundled up and stuffed in the cubby behind the driver's seat. If either he or the truck needed to rest during daylight hours, he could always unroll the tarpaulin that was tied up above the driver's side window and stake it to the ground for shade. Apart from the underside of her grill, Green Betty was flat-nosed, so the top bar of the grill was festooned with various radio antennas. They bothered his line of sight a little while he drove, but he wasn't about to engage in a form versus function debate over it. Anything that helped him get across this great country, great country continent, in one piece was okay by him, and to that end, radio equipment was as valuable as damper and drinking water. They'd been together for a pretty good piece, but he always knew she was as temporary as the garage, house, and motorcycle. It had only ever been a matter of time before duty called from one quarter or another. The work was what he lived for. He was only killing time in the outback. That's why he would radio an acquaintance when he neared the outskirts of Perth and arrange for someone to pick up and repurpose Green Betty so that he could make his way cleanly to the airport. No sense wasting another moment. He unlatched a much larger door that took up almost an entire wall of the garage and swung it inward until he could tie it back. Then he opened the door of Green Betty and pulled himself up into place by using the steering wheel as a handhold. The engine turned over with the roar of life before settling into a trembling idle. He pulled his door shut and eased the vehicle out of hiding. With the fluorescent light still burning forlornly in his side view mirror, he stepped harder on the gas and was on his way. About time for a little fun. He rounded the turn leading to the main road and left his home of the past 3.5 years behind. Soon it was eclipsed by a cloud of red dust in his wake and a mantle of starlit night overhead. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you enjoy the book, The Portable Nine, global thriller from me, Pete Mesling. Out very, very soon from my Other Kingdoms Publishing brand, or maybe out already, depending on when you're watching this. Take care.